Welcome back to Micro-Digressions. I hope for many of you, this is the first episode of 2026. And I'm here today with, I'm Spencer Case as usual. You probably know that. I'm here today with Eric Wiland. How are you doing, Eric?
Cold, very cold today, but otherwise fine. I live in St. Louis. Right now we have a blizzard about to descend upon us and everybody's freaking out, of course. But I get to do something fun, which is talk to you. So that's nice.
This was on the news even. This is like not just St. Louis. This is like the whole eastern half of the US or something.
Yeah, it's going to be bad for a lot of people, they say. And so that's winter, that's okay.
It's hitting us hard too here in Tucson. We've got some mild rain.
Wow, you stay safe. Yeah.
Can't really complain about the weather here in January. In August, you definitely can.
Yeah, no, I've been to Tucson in January. It's really pleasant.
You were there just a few days ago. Yeah.
No, not a few days ago, but in past years.
Right. I was
I
thinking
had visited Tucson in January, and yeah, it's lovely. Yeah, good for you.
Okay. So I wanted to dive into your book, Guided by Voices, which turns out is not a schizophrenia memoir.
No, well, there's text and there's subtext, but it's not really a schizophrenia memoir. The book is about advice, and it's about moral testimony. And the title is also the name of a indie rock band that I love. So I cribbed the name of the band to use as the title for the book. And the lawyers have not said anything yet. So I think Oxford University Press is happy that that the band is okay with that.
All right. I'm not hip to Guided by Voices, I have to say, but now I'm going to have to check them out. What inspired this topic, your interest in this topic?
Yeah, long story. I'll try not to make it long. But it goes way back to when I was in graduate school, which was I don't know, 30 years ago. And I was interested in metaethics. I was interested in whether moral realism is true. Okay. And Bernard Williams had a powerful argument against moral realism. That argument was something that had to do with moral disagreement and moral agreement. And Williams was saw that the mere fact that people morally disagree was no real evidence against the reality of morality. Rather, what matters is how moral disagreement gets explained. Is it best explained by the idea that one of the disagreeers is cognitively or rationally failing in some way? But he also said some things about moral agreement. And he said if people eventually come to agree with each other morally, the best explanation for that is not going to be that they've converged on some truth, that they've figured it out, they've discovered it, like we do in science, but rather it will be because of cultural homogeneity. People will come to share the same culture, and that's what's going to explain moral agreement. And so the best explanation of that moral agreement is not going to vindicate the reality of morality. That was Williams's argument in his book, Ethics and the Limits of Philosophy. I like that argument, but I wanted to argue against it, or at least issue some sort of a counter argument. So I was thinking about advice as a possible counter argument to that, because if Spencer, if I advise you to do something, and before I advise you to do something, you were like, I don't think that's such a good idea. But then I advise you and you say okay, well, I'm going to trust Eric's advice. Then you've kind of changed your view about what you should do to match mine. That's a kind of convergence in practical opinion. And from your point of view, the best explanation of that convergence better be that I'm in a better position to figure out what it really is true that you should do. Otherwise, it seems kind of arbitrary for you to trust my advice as opposed to your own kind of solo opinion. So from the advisee's point of view, when the advisee trusts an advisor, it seems like the best explanation of the convergence in practical opinion about what one should do is going to involve an explanation that's really friendly to the moral realist. So anyway, I'm telling you about why I got interested in advice. This was a long time ago, but that's what caught my eye. Okay. And I really thought about that by first thinking about like why we have a reason to obey the law. So if the law says you should do something, and like one reason is to avoid punishment, of course. But is there at least sometimes under certain conditions a reason to kind of defer to what the law says you should do because those making the law might be in a better position to figure out what people should do. Obviously, that's not going to be true for many actual governments, okay? But maybe it does hold for certain kinds of governments. Anyway, that's the answer, I think.
Yeah, just to put a bow on the response to William's part, if I guess you could say, well, there are different kinds of cultural convergence. There might be epistemically vicious kinds, which just conformism that has nothing to do with the truth. But there's also maybe a virtuous kind of possible moral convergence that has to do with people who are in a better position to know, giving advice to others. And so, the convergence isn't necessarily vicious. It could be normatively inspired in a way.
Yeah, I mean, you could sort of like upgrade your view about what to do by deferring or at least moving in the direction a little bit of people who you think might be in a position to have insights that you don't. Everything that I was saying before kind of like harmonizes uh, well, not everything, but a lot of it harmonizes with what standpoint epistemologists say about some of this stuff. Back when I was dissertating, standpoint epistemology was basically a thing in the philosophy of science. Now, moral philosophers have kind of like glommed onto it in a way that fits with what I was thinking back then. But more recently, my interest in advice has to do with this newer discussion in moral philosophy circles about moral testimony and whether there's something fishy or inappropriate or at least less than ideal about deferring to another person's testimony about what's right or wrong, morally good or bad. Philosophers, as we do, like don't all come down on the same side of that issue. Some people think that there is something fishy or at least less than ideal about deferring to another person's testimony about morality. And others think like actually no, there's nothing peculiarly problematic about it. So when that became a lively topic in the literature, my interest in advice got rekindled. Okay. I wasn't thinking about things in terms of testimony and the transmission of belief. I was thinking about things in terms of advice and sort of a practical deference. But they're very close to each other. And so I started engaging with that kind of stuff. And that's what led to the book. So part of the book is about moral testimony, and part of the book is about moral advice. Slightly different things, but like they share a lot in common.
Yeah, one thing I think you've done that's really nice here is you've noticed a site of intersection of a lot of different questions that seems to be overlooked. Like these are familiar questions I've seen brought up in different contexts, but you located an interesting point of intersection between some practical questions, some metaethical questions, some moral epistemology questions, and I think that's really interesting.
Cool. Yeah, I do too. Thanks.
At the beginning of the book, you say something. I admit I haven't gotten all the way through it, but maybe you come back to this later. But I thought that's an interesting thing, which is that you talk about wide reflective equilibrium, and that is it's an individualistic process. It's happening within the mind of a single individual, and you could even say, well, this is of course when you're considering principles and intuitions and trying to harmonize them to get the best philosophical account of something. That I just for the sake of the listener who doesn't know that.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. No, and you're reminding me of like parts that I haven't looked at in a little while.
Oh, so you make the point that this is an individualistic process, and I think you could even say more than that. You could say it's a process within an individual in a relatively short time slice of an individual's life. How wide is it really? Compared to other epistemic processes, the scientific method is a very social method. Obviously, it requires multiple agents looking at things from
Yeah.
different angles. The Socratic method is a philosophical method that requires at least two interlocutors, but It seems like it's supposed to be iterated through many interlocutors. And yet it seems like we might still be operating mainly, even supposedly now that we're more aware about the social processes in philosophy and we're supposed to be scientifically literate about this, it still seems like we might be downstream of Descartes and still thinking it's all going within the head of one person, really. Anyway, I was hoping you could elaborate on that.
Yeah, I think yeah, that's I think what yeah, that's certainly right about like Descartes is still in our heads in a way. I also think like Kant is still in our heads because Kant was the champion of autonomy when it comes to like things moral, right? And heteronomy is a no-no, like letting others like shape what you think is a no-no. And even those who aren't, card carrying Kantians still are very influenced by that. And and I am too. I'm not one of these I don't like I love Kant. I think a lot to learn there. It's great, but not everything is correct. And I think this is one of the areas in which he overreached because, although there probably is some sort of a priori basis to ethics, that's not the only way to figure the stuff out. It's often not the best way. I think we can at least say that. And yeah, I think we ought to rely on others when we think about this stuff. So, just a autobiographical note, although not a lot of detail, but you know, I think that I've led a very privileged, very sheltered life. So when I exercise my solo moral judgment about like what I should do, like how I should be living, and what I owe to other people. The way that things strike me, even if I make all of my views sort of like internally coherent, having gone through the reflective equilibrium process, like what are the chances that that's the best I can do? It seems like I might do better by not only like listening to what other people have to say, but when I feel unsure about what to do, relying on them to some extent. How to strike that balance between relying on other people, like you don't want to rely on other people like too much, right? You don't want to abandon your own good judgment. But it seems like there is some happy medium there when it comes to moral thinking. I don't know what it is, but I think like there are the extremes are not where you want to be.
Yeah, let's focus on this autonomy, heteronomy kind of situation, because there's an interesting set of questions here. Just so, what is the anti-heteronomy thing getting at? It seems like there's a kind of over reliance that's vicious, sort of like the moral counterpart of the person whose advisor is really writing his dissertation for him.
Yeah,
Yeah, something like that seems bad. It seems like there's something similar that's bad about that, but maybe even worse. Like I have my ability, I have the ability to think critically about what people are telling me. But, it's easier, it's more convenient to adopt the views of the people around me so as to avoid social friction, as to avoid people judging me when I don't agree with them. Okay, something like that seems really bad.
yeah, that's
But
right.
might there be people, though? I mean, you bring this case up, and I don't know if you come back to it, but might there be people whose own native ability to make judgments, to make moral judgments, is impaired in such a way that relying on other people might be the best they can do? You couldn't like it. I think you gave the example, very interesting example of a psychopath who, I'm not sure what reason, either instrumental or the shadow of a moral reason, says, I'll just, defer to other people about what the moral questions are because I can't obviously see these things myself. I find no intuition to say that somebody who does that is doing anything wrong.
Sure, sure. And a lot of like if one is genuinely incapable of like thinking properly and about this stuff, then I think like everybody agrees that like, well, better for the psychopath to rely on others than to go it alone. And I think almost everybody agrees that in deferring all the time, like the psychopath is still like that's not ideal. Okay. I think we're all like I don't think we're all psychopaths, but I think we're all like we all have deficiencies. Like no, as they say, nobody's perfect. Nobody's experienced everything that matters or that's important. And so I think most of us, maybe all of us, can do better by involving others in a more serious way than than the cartoon Kantian picture displays. Okay. Um, I think the question is just like how much, and for children, it's going to be like quite a lot. Pretty much everyone thinks that children have to defer to the moral judgments of adults. I mean, it's best to. There's no better option for them. Most of us grow most of the way out of that. Okay, I'm not so sure that any of us grow all the way out of that. I don't think that there's like quite the sharp line that like we might think.
All right, so you're leading me to think about a more far-fetched kind of thought experiment.
Okay.
So it seems like what you're saying is a lot of moral knowledge comes from experience, and we need to rely on others because necessarily we're limited in our experience. Other people will have experienced things we have not. I wonder though, suppose we lived super long lives. Suppose human beings lived like 10,000 years and could experience all these different things. So if you've lived a long enough life, you will have experienced basically the range of possible human experience. If one individual were, able to have the entire range of human experiences, could that person be autonomous in this radical Kantian way? Would we have transcended the need for testimony on others in that radical case?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think we need to think a little bit more about the details of that experiment because there might be certain kinds of experiences that are just like incompatible with others, such that like a life of perpetual celibacy might be one experience that is incompatible with certain other kinds of lives. But I see where you're going, and I think like if we imagine something like that, that might be better. And I think that partially explains why, at least in most human societies, the elderly are kind of respected as being a little more wise than those who are younger, just because they've had a wider variety of experiences. As an older person now, and as someone who's been a parent, I kind of understand why older people, you know, sometimes think about younger people like you'll understand when you get older. You can't. I get it. You don't understand now, but you'll understand later. Some of that can be patronizing, of course, no doubt. But there's still like there's still a kernel of truth there. Yeah. So I do
I
think.
want to modify it again. I want to modify my thought experiment again. Okay, what if it's like it's not one person who's lived 10,000 years? What if it's like there's like a public library of experiences, and it's like you plug into it like the Matrix. So you plug
Yeah.
into it, and
The
now
experience machine.
you've experienced. Yes, it's like the experience machine, but this is for educational purposes. So and it not to detached from ordinary life and all that stuff. You go to the experience library and you plug yourself in, and now you've experienced in a few seconds you've experienced the entire life of a 14th century monk, and now you know what that's like. um I don't know. I guess you have to imagine humans being, maybe we have some chips in our head that allow us to store all this. Or, the technology is getting a little out of control here. But the thought being that if we could have access to the experiences, I don't know. I might be tempted to say you might even be selling the dependence on advice thing short, because different people might have different like interpretations or lessons from the same experiences, even if all those experiences were available to us.
Yeah, and it might depend upon the order in which you experience things too. I mean, ordering and framing, those kinds of things influence us in ways that are not fully rational, and anyway, that would matter. But that could be an improvement. So I want to just tie this back to a couple bits in the history of philosophy. Somewhere towards the end of the Republic, Socrates says that the philosophers are in the best position to know like how what's good for a person and how a person should live. And that's because there are three different kinds of pleasures, like only three. And only the philosopher has experienced all three. So the philosopher is really the only person who's in a good position to say like which pleasure is better than others. And if it turns out that the pleasures of philosophy are superior, Socrates claims, to the other kinds of pleasures. And other people, non-philosophers, don't understand the pleasures of philosophy, so they're not in a good position to judge. Well, I mean, there's a lot that's wrong with that argument. There are more than three kinds of pleasures. It's not clear that experience of pleasure is the only kind of experience that matters, but it's on the same track that I think it's on the right track. And this appears again in Mill's utilitarianism, of course, where he says that pleasures come in different qualities. And it's really the people who've experienced two kinds of pleasures who are in a position to determine like which kind of pleasure is of a higher quality. Those who haven't experienced both kinds of pleasures or not. So again, it's on pleasure. One thing I think is equally important is pain and suffering and negative kinds of experiences of negative things too. And I think that's what a lot of the more contemporary literature on like oppression and the epistemology that comes from that gets right, which is sometimes there are certain forms of suffering that it's really hard for somebody who hasn't undergone it to like understand and kind of like suss out what's important and what's not important. So I don't know how to I don't know how to like add to the list completely, but I think the list that, Socrates and Mill started is on the right track, but we have to add a lot more.
Jason Werbeloff, one of the co-hosts of the Brain and Yvette podcast, along with Mark Oppenheimer, and a frequent sparring partner of mine, I think he'll be quite open in telling you that he's experienced both sexual pleasures and philosophical pleasures, plenty of each, and he definitely prefers the lower over the higher.
Yeah,
Plato or Mill might struggle with what to do with somebody like that.
totally.
I guess yeah, maybe we should roll over into this understanding argument, this idea that there's something bad about moral testimony because it doesn't convey understanding. I guess it's just a general sense that testimony is a second rate way of knowing, or it's derivative, right? Like even in the case of like, you've got a witness at a trial testifying, yes, I was there, I saw the murder. That can convey knowledge, but it's not the same as the people on the jury having seen it with their own eyes. It's a derivative kind of knowledge. But I think people think that moral testimony, it's derivative in a more profound way.
Yeah, it's not all testimony is derivative. Some kinds of testimony, although derivative, are not inferior forms of knowledge. So I told you what my name is, right? That's a bit of testimony. It's not clear that like your knowledge of what my name is like any worse than my knowledge of what my name is. But yes, you're right. Moral stuff seems different. Okay, right? And in the literature, you'll see lots of examples that illustrate this kind of thing where one person tells another person that, I don't know, like one standard example is like eating meat is wrong, okay? And then the person who receives the testimony believes it, but they don't understand like if it's really true, if it's really true that eating meat is wrong. For the record, I don't think that's true. They don't understand why it's wrong. So moral testimony does not transmit moral understanding. And if moral understanding is important, then there may seem to be something problematic or at least incomplete about moral testimony. There are a lot of responses to this kind of argument. One response is something like kind of concedes the point. Like, yes, moral testimony doesn't deliver moral understanding, but moral testimony doesn't deliver a lot of goods, right? It doesn't deliver any gustatory pleasure either, right? But that's not a problem, right? It's still like we shouldn't say that something is bad because it fails to deliver this other thing that would be good to have. It's good in its own way. That's one response. A second response, which I think is more interesting and which I try to spell out in the book a little bit, is that in most like real life standard cases, rather than cartoonish cases where one person accepts moral testimony from another person, The recipient already has like some idea of what goods and bads are at stake in making a moral decision and really just has trouble or needs help figuring out how to weigh them up. So let's work with, because it's an example everybody's going to be familiar with, let's talk about a trolley case. So suppose like Spencer, you are unsure whether you should turn the trolley, whether you should do nothing and let the trolley kill 5 people, or whether you should turn the trolley and kill one. And if you're unsure, somebody you trust, let's pretend it's me, tells you, Spencer, you ought to turn the trolley. You ought to. You might believe me, you might accept my moral testimony, but in so accepting my moral testimony, like when you combine that with what you originally knew on your own, you weren't like completely confused that human life has value and that what you do intentionally matters, but you can combine what you get from the testimony with what you yourself kind of brought to the table and have something that looks like moral understanding. Even before you get my testimony, you can probably suss out like, well, if it's right for me to turn the trolley, that has something to do with the fact that I'll be saving the lives of more people. And if it's wrong for me to turn the trolley, that probably has something to do with the fact that my agency is more directly implemented in like the killing of a person. But
Now,
if you don't know what to do, you don't know what to do. And then when you take my testimony, you can combine that with what you brought to the table and have something that looks like moral understanding, because you'll understand to some extent like why you should turn the trolley. It's not that you're just being a robot and have no understanding of why you should turn the trolley. You do understand. Realistic cases are like that. The cases that appear in philosophy articles often are not like that.
that's the first time I've heard a realistic case being like a trolley problem.
I know, I know. I mean, it's
Realistic cases are like that.
yeah,
Do I know that I can go to the late Judith Jarvis Thompson and hear the opposite advice? Because I think her ultimate opinion was actually maybe you shouldn't turn the trolley, because she was thinking if you can turn the trolley and kill one rather than five, then you can kill one to save other people in other contexts, and that leads you to utilitarianism, which you think
yeah.
it's a little bit weird if I ask you and you tell me turn the trolley, but I know there's this other person who is, I guess, your peer, my superior, your peer, and that person would give me the opposite advice. I haven't heard from her. She hasn't given me the advice, but I know that's her position. But you've given me the advice. Should that have special weight that I've heard that you've given me the advice?
Mm, because like I've actually advised you rather than you've can just guessing how I've advised you.
Yeah, or if I heard you over here, so if I heard
Right.
you over here, you giving the advice to someone else, you haven't advised me,
Right.
but I've
Good.
heard it. Yeah.
Good. Good. That's a great question. Now I understand the question. That's a great question. I suspect there's a difference between, moral testimony and moral advice in this respect, but maybe not. Here's how I want to think about it. If I decide to advise you to turn the trolley, I think on the hook for what you do if you trust me. Like it's not a I am involved. In fact, I want to say towards the end of the book, I argue, perhaps unsuccessfully, but I argue that we form like a brief practical union where like we turn the trolley. Okay. But in any case, I think if I decide to advise you, I'm assuring you about what's right. I'm on the hook. And I think if I'm assuring you, then that might reasonably boost your confidence in trusting what I say, as opposed to what you might learn if you overhear something from somebody else, or if you can like confidently imagine how somebody would advise you. This gets into issues. Your microphone is off.
But if I'm hearing your advice to somebody else, I don't have any reason to think that you're going to be more confident, or you're more cautious or whatever in your advice to that person than to me. So now I get from the speaker's perspective, there might be a difference. Like if the person you intended to advise turns the trolley, you might share some responsibility in that, whereas if I did it, you wouldn't. But I'm just thinking from the hearer's perspective, is there a difference there?
Uh, I'm not sure. It might depend on the case, but I can see in the trolley case, like maybe there's not a big difference. But think about like you overhear advise me somebody else about whether they should get divorced. Okay. It's not obvious like you don't know how I would advise you if you were facing the exact same question, right? Because details are going to be relevantly different. And that's one thing about the trolley case that's sort of like highly artificial. In real life, similar cases are not still not identical. There might be relevant differences. And so I think if you're the hearer or the recipient of that kind of thing, you might feel like somewhat unsure about whether the differences matter in your case, the case that you face, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. I've got one more annoying little variation on this
No,
before
this is fun. Let's
I can't help myself.
I like it.
So, what if I disguise myself as one of your graduate students? You intend to be giving your trolley turning advice to one of your graduate students, but I don't know if it would be correct to say you're advising me, but I am the one who you're speaking to, thinking that you're addressing somebody else, but I'm right in front of you disguised. I don't know, maybe I have one of those Mission Impossible masks. I don't know how I pull this off. And okay, then I turn the trolley. Are you responsible for what I do, or does it matter that you intended that advice for somebody else?
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of want to say that you're not as responsible. Like the advisor who is tricked about who the advisee is. This is like some, yeah, this is like some this is a good situation. Okay, yeah, I think you're not as responsible, but I don't know how to defend that. Yeah, it's just a gut feeling. In thinking about this stuff, it's made me more reluctant to advise people, okay? Because I think like when I do, I'm potentially on the hook for what they do on my advice if they decide to trust it. Um, that's why when graduate students like ask me like, "Oh, should I apply?" I'm in a my department has a master's program, so my graduate students often ask me, you know, should I apply to PhD programs? What do you advise, Eric? Like, I don't know. Like, here's some things you want to think about. But
You tell them, be careful. You might get an acceptance that could ruin your life.
yeah, like, nah, I should add that to the list, right? Yeah.
Can you mitigate responsibility? I don't know. Maybe not mitigate is not the right word. Can you diminish it, but with it by adding a disclaimer? Surely, if you say, "Now, keep in mind, this is just my advice. I could be wrong about this. Other people would give you different advice."
Think so. I mean, I think it's sort of like it's in the same way that like if you were to ask me, uh, if you were to ask me like whether it's going to snow in St. Louis tomorrow, I could say like, yeah, it's going to snow in St. Louis tomorrow, or I could say, well, I believe it will. If I, it pragmatically, if I preface what I believe with the words "I believe," that kind of like signals some reluctance to have my listener rely on me for what like for the information. Like if I just say like I believe it will, I'm not telling you like trust me on this, Spencer. It right. I'm just like reporting what I believe, but not, I'm trying not to push it on you. So too, like I think if uh if I advise you, but if I say like, well, here's just my advice. That functions kind of. It seems to function kind of similarly. It's a bit of a hedge, right? It's like here's my take on things, but it's not. You shouldn't rely on it. You should. Sometimes I often tell students like, here's my advice, but you should ask other people like about like what they think. You should get advice from multiple people. That's a little bit different from like wholeheartedly assuring somebody like Spencer, turn the Burn the trolley. Like that is not hedged.
Mhm.
That's explicit and direct, and I think that invites more responsibility.
So if you say you should do what Julia, your colleague, advises you to do, and then they go to Julia, and Julia says you should throw your applications in the garbage and scrape barnacles off of ships for a living. Are you now now partly responsible for that advice?
Ooh, so chains, like advice chains. That's nowhere in the book, I don't think. My hunch is no. Why is that my hunch? I think, like, if you ask me something, if you ask me what the weather's going to be like tomorrow, and I say, uh, I don't know, go ask Julia. Like, she'll tell you. And then Julia, like, you go ask Julia, and she tells you that, well, tomorrow, the frogs will descend from the sky, and other kinds of crazy stuff. Then, like, I haven't told you that. Moreover, like when I tell you that you can rely on Julia, I'm thinking that there's a range of answers that if she gives one of them, like, you should trust her about what she says. But if she says something like way outside that range, like, then things are different. I think when we tell people to rely on somebody else, whether in like standard epistemology cases or in practical cases, I think there often is an implicit range. If my daughter were to ask me, she's got a problem with her friend, what should she do? I say, go ask your mother. And then her mother tells her, like, kill your friend. Just kill your friend. I'm like, that was not in the range of practical answers that I was thinking that my wife would give when I told my daughter to go ask her mother, right? I was thinking, my wife would being more sensible, like, which in fact she is, would give a an answer within a range of answers. I myself wasn't sure, like, what in that range is the best answer. I thought my wife would have a better selection. That's how I'm starting to think about this kind of case.
That seems reasonable. That seems reasonable. I do wonder, like, how far the extent of the responsibility goes. Like, I mean, in official roles, there are people whose their job is to be advisors. Like the people advising the president, the king's advisors, and it seems like if things go south based on one of the advice of these people, that person should get canned or whatever. But in a case where it's not formal, like, I really don't know that there's any responsibility there. So certainly I couldn't take you to court and sue you because I followed your bad advice. If you were not a hired advisor, even if you were, I don't know, but certainly if you weren't, like, you wouldn't be a higher, I don't think I could sue you. And it's not like the legality and morality come apart, but it doesn't seem like this is one of those cases. It doesn't seem like you now owe me compensation for whatever harm has befallen me over following your advice.
Yeah, maybe not you, but I may owe something to the people that you've harmed on my advice or the people you've wronged on my advice. That could be. The law is actually kind of funny about this stuff too. So there's a section of the US criminal code which says that well, it's complicated, but like the relevant part is, like, you're punishable if you commit an offense against the United States, or you uh aid, abet, counsel, or command somebody to commit offense against the United States.
So if I say should I do to deal with my financial situation, and you said you should rob a bank, you'd be well advised to get a posse together and rob a bank. And that's what I do. You might, in fact, have that would be abetting. I think that's the actual literal meaning of abetting a crime is something like that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that is legally punishable. Maybe it shouldn't be. I'm not taking a stand on that, but it's kind of interesting that it is the way the US law at least is written. It's often not enforced, of course, but it's there on the books and it's occasionally enforced. There's another case I discuss at the end of the book where like briefly, there's a young couple who are romantically involved. They're not in the same place. They talk on the telephone a lot. The young man is psychologically distressed and suicidal. The girlfriend advises him over and over again to kill himself.
Oh, I
And
read about this case. I read
yeah,
about this case. This is real. This is
yeah,
terrible. This is a
this is real.
really, really terrible case.
Yeah, and she was found. She was criminally punished for counseling him, advising him, abetting him to kill himself. And so her defense was like, "Look, I didn't do anything. All I did was like advise him to do something." But like that didn't pass legal muster.
Actually, the details of this case I think matter because if I recall, this person was decided upon killing himself by the method of suffocating himself in the car with carbon monoxide. And he was in the car. And just as he was about to die, he had second thoughts, got out of the car, called his girlfriend. His girlfriend said, "Get back in the car and finish the job,"
Something
basically.
like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is absolutely sick. And it is a it is an interesting case for free speech because she wasn't abetting a crime because killing yourself isn't a crime, I don't think. Or at least, is it? I don't know.
I don't know
Does it
what it
depend
is.
on the state? I don't know.
I think it was in New Jersey, I want to say. I'm not sure. And I don't remember that.
Yeah. But
So
do you think
right.
that do you recall whether the legality depended on that? Because it seems like maybe it shouldn't. Maybe we should just punish this person anyway.
I mean, I think the idea was, even if like suicide is not a crime, she was being punished as the a person who killed him. Basically, there were two people who killed him. He killed himself and she killed him. That's homicide. She is guilty of homicide. I think that's the way that the law saw it. And that's kind of interesting that you can be guilty of homicide for just saying things. Now, Henry Kissinger just said things and people died as a result. People
Right.
were killed as a result.
Right.
And lots of people say, like, Kissinger killed these people.
Yeah.
Truman said something, right? And people were killed as a result.
Well, those
Sometimes
were
people,
orders. Though he was
that's true.
in the chain of command, and Kissinger was not.
Yeah, so Kissinger was an advisor, Truman was a commander. These are both directives of different kinds, but like neither like held the gun, held the knife, or anything like that. The mob boss just says something, right? People get killed. The
And
mob boss,
the mob boss might not even make it an order. He might say, "Boy, I wish this inconvenient person would go away somehow."
yeah. So that gets into the pragmatics of like those kinds of speech acts. Sure, sure. So I mean, there's interesting territory here, and there are several possible views. Like one is that only the person who like shoots the gun is responsible. Another is only the person who gives the order is responsible. Everyone else is not responsible because they were just following orders or just following good advice. A third view is that each is, both are responsible. And I think that third view is often apt.
Okay, I think you've convinced me a way out of my skepticism that you can be responsible to the point of owing damages for bad advice. But I still wonder whether something weaker might be true, whether that is true only of like reprehensible advice, like
Mm.
telling you to do something awful, telling you to do something illegal. But if your advice lies within, I don't know, a normal range and things go south and have bad consequences for me and perhaps for some third party, I'm still not sure whether you're responsible in a case like that.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Right. That does feel different. Of course, like a different kind of case that doesn't rely on advice. Like suppose I do something for you that seems reasonable, but things go south. There's bad luck involved. Okay. And you are harmed by what I in fact did. Even if what I did was reasonable at the time, I owe you at least like a apology, an expression of like sorry, maybe even some compensation, although it depends upon the case. Yeah, I mean, I think what the advisor owes is a little less than that, but I'm not sure that it diminishes to zero. Like if I advise somebody to do something for you and it goes south, like, and you find out, like, you say to them, like, "Why'd you do that?" And they said, "Well, Eric advised me." And then you come to me. I think I owe you something. I'm not sure what I owe you. Not compensation. I agree. It's not compensation.
I mean, I think the case might matter here because
Absolutely.
there are times when when good advice leads to bad results, and you could say that was just what all the evidence was saying. This You were just profoundly unlucky. You invest in this option, all of the evidence is good, and then something happens with the economy. So I guess I'm tempted to say that even an apology is only really owed if there's something wrong with the advice, given the evidence that you have.
Yeah, I that sounds right to me. I probably shouldn't have suggested otherwise. That seems right. If the advice itself was sound, if the decision uh, that the advisee makes on the basis of the advice is sound, then even if things go south, like one owes kindness, maybe some kind of Bernard Williams style agent regret, but not genuine regret. Yeah.
Interesting. I hadn't gotten into the standpoint epistemology parts of that book of the book. I have some thoughts about this issue though, so maybe why don't you say some of what you say in the book, and we'll get to that.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So, like earlier, we were talking about how people who have experienced pleasures or pains might have insights that naive people ought to rely on in various ways. And so, I guess a lot of standpoint epistemology in the philosophy of science emerged from this idea that most scientists themselves have a similar demographic profile. Others have like not participated in the scientific endeavor. This has sort of shaped how science has proceeded, and certain kinds of truths have been missed or overlooked as a result of that. And there are benefits to having a scientific community which is more demographically diverse. And then I think something like that is probably true with respect to morality. Um, in that, let's let me come up with an example. Suppose my people in my department are suppose my department is gets approval to do a job search, okay, so to hire another philosopher, and like somebody suggests like, well, Eric, like you don't have any conservatives in your department, okay, and maybe it would be good to like have a conservative in your department. That'd be good for students who are conservatives. And I hear that and I'm like, I don't know. I mean, is it really that bad to be a undergraduate who's a conservative and none of your philosophy professors be conservative? Like, yeah, that's not maybe that's not a big deal. I don't know. It doesn't seem like that important. I think other things are more important. If they say like, yeah, well, Eric, you think that because you just don't understand what it's like to be you don't understand what it's like to be a conservative student and like have none of your professors share your political outlook. It'd be really good for them if there's like at least some person that was like a little closer to them. And I'd be like, yeah, I don't know. It doesn't seem that important to me, but look, it sounds like you've had some experiences that I haven't had. Maybe you're in a better position than I am to figure out like whether that's important or unimportant. So I'm not just gonna go with my like solo judgment on this. I'm gonna borrow like some of your experience basically, or base my practical decision on your experiences as well as my own. Try to come up with something that incorporates both. That'd be a kind of way of exercising standpoint epistemology, I think, in a practical sphere, and in a way that like you and maybe some of your viewers could understand, where it seems to be important to take into account the lessons that other people have learned from their own personal experiences. Now, like the little example that I just gave is parallel to other kinds of examples where A lot of my undergraduates are African American, right? No African Americans in my department, right? On the faculty. Is that bad? I don't know. Doesn't seem so bad to me, but like maybe I myself am not in the position to figure out like how important or unimportant that question is. Maybe I can see that I'm not naive in that respect. And so I might want to rely on people who have different experiences than I have in order to come up with like the best judgment that I can.
Very, very, very wise of you to lead with the gentle slope with the conservative example with me. Yeah, I think my reaction is that there has to be something to it. There has to be some grain of truth to both of these cases, the standpoint epistemology. Though I guess part of I kind of think that there are often complications. Like in particular cases, there are kind of complications. So like the kind of things that we consider in the wild, that you often find this in philosophy, are much more complicated than the simplified cases that we have thought experiments about and stuff. And I think this comes up a lot with the standpoint epistemology stuff. Here are things that can happen. Like how would it be to hire a conservative? I think it would be, on balance, there'd probably be something to be said in favor of it. But the thing is that there's never just one variable here.
Life is messy.
Yeah.
Yep.
So conservatives might have one epistemic advantage because they have seen these dynamics play. They are aware of the other's arguments more than is reciprocated. And yet, too much marginalization, and you stop even really engaging and trying to justify yourself. You retreat into your own echo chambers. You have a chip on your shoulder, and that messes with you too. And then you can find, I think that similar things might be true in the racial case. Like, so let me have a third example that's distinct from both, that might show you the kind of thing I have in mind. Imagine somebody who's been in a romantic relationship with somebody who's extremely manipulative, like a manipulative person. This person might gain a certain moral awareness, an awareness of, one, what it's like to be manipulated, warning signs of what a manipulative partner is like. But likely this person will also come away with some baggage of like paranoia. You've been manipulated once, you think you see manipulative behavior in other people, and maybe you're not really seeing it. And I tend to think that this is a very common kind of a thing, like the kind of epistemic benefits that standpoint epistemologists identify. They come with a lot of baggage too, which makes the individual case very difficult to evaluate.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It is difficult. Certain kinds of experiences, uh, I think, can be educative, right? So they can help you see what's important more clearly. Some kinds of experiences, however, can be, corrupting or distorting. So it does not improve your practical judgment. It makes it worse. And then, some kinds of experiences can be a little of the first and a little of the second, but in different ways. And so that's why it is like in the real world, it is like really it's not easy to identify who might be in a better position than you are, such that you would defer to them, right? But, if 99 out of 100 women say the same thing, that's going to get my attention. Even if I don't see it for myself, like that's going to get my attention. The idea that like women are scared to walk outside alone at night, I believe it. But I believe it because like I believe it's dangerous for them. But I wouldn't see it for myself. I have to listen, like I have to like, trust them about like what it's like in order for me to like really genuinely appreciate it. I mean, I might see it
Yeah,
in some.
that's a good example, because that's not something I would have picked up without hearing from other people.
Yeah. Yeah. Um so now it's certainly open for somebody to respond like, gosh, like those like that just means 99 out of 100 women are paranoid or, a bit are overreacting, but like that's not really like like that doesn't strike me as a very plausible like plausible assessment of the situation in that case. So but yeah, to get back to your more general point, yeah, it's complicated and experiences can go both ways. But I do think that as a matter of fact, we tend to rely on people who we think have undergone experiences that we suspect are more good, like more helpful than harmful when it comes to like tutoring one's practical judgment.
I think as safety related considerations as a general matter, I might be willing more to defer in cases like that because I have this background expectation that just evolutionarily we're going to be more attuned to safety in our environment. Like I feel like this is when our intuitions are going to be most carefully honed, right? If you're interacting with somebody and you have a feeling like something is wrong here, something is off here, I don't know what, but something is off, you should just trust you should just trust that and ask questions later. I think that is quite good advice. So I think the kind of example you're giving is an especially should have a special weightiness because we would expect their social perception to be most highly attuned to exactly this kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. So I picked the favorable example. It's not going to like completely generalize to every case, but that's the way that like practical life works.
All right. Well, we've gone a bit over an hour. Is there anything? I'm sure that I mean there's a lot of things we haven't got to. Anything in particular you want to get to that we haven't gotten to in this conversation?
Um, I mean, one of the we one thing I touched on, I guess, but maybe I would like to say a little bit more about is this idea that when like one person advises another and the advice is like trusted and taken, that the two people like at least very temporarily form like a practical union or a joint agent such that either of them can say, we did this thing together. It sounds far fetched at first. When I first present this idea to people, they politely make that kind of face, look a little bit skeptical. But there are obviously organizational forums where like one person like directs and others sort of execute those directions. They can be very formal like a government or an army. They can be less formal like a club, or they can be like just two people like dancing the tango, but like one person has to lead, okay, and the other person has to like follow in a way. And so I think I think we should like be aware that be more aware that some kinds of agency are joint in this way. There are people doing things together. And like that can be so even if one person is like doing little more than just like advising. Okay. It's kind of interesting and also fraught to think like who do you want to team up with? If you partially constitute a joint agent, that might be really cool if you pick good people or pick people who make you better. But it could also be kind of dangerous because if you pick the wrong people, you can be part of something that's like really bad.
Yeah, I'm a little bit surprised by the joint agent talk, a little bit.
Yeah, no, it's a little out there.
So some people like just think the whole idea of joint agency is just like woo woo, like even when it's like militaries or companies or
Mhm,
the student body government or whatever. I wonder though, one thing that's odd about this is typically when we think about joint agency, we're thinking about like a shared intention,
mhm,
but there could be examples of advice that's like conditional advice where the advisee or the advisor does not actually intend the advisee to carry it out, like could not have that intention. So suppose I'm a veteran, suppose I'm like a pacifist in the future and my kid asks me which branch of the military to join. Well, I don't want you to join any branch of the military, but if you are going to join the military, I advise you to go for the army rather than the Marines. Okay, so that's advice, but there's no joint intention there because I don't want him to act on my advice. And so, where there's no joint intention, it seems weird to talk about joint agency to me.
yeah, agree. I mean, that's a great example. That's an example of a conditional advice or you know, but it's not wholehearted advice. It's not unconditional advice. So I agree that that's not a case of joint agency. And really, like lots of forms of unconditional advice are also not forms of joint agency. So like if I advise you to get married to I don't know, somebody, um, like only you are marrying that person. Like it's not that we together are marrying that person. That's kind of crazy. So I don't know how to draw the line between cases of unconditional advice that do manifest joint agency and cases that don't.
Now, could it be once I take your advice, the non-conditional advice case, you advise me to marry May, and then I propose to her. At that point, the joint agent is dissolved. It's done. It's done its purpose. It's not here anymore.
Mhm.
And so it's not like you wouldn't want to say that the joint agent that's created through a following of unconditional advice exists in perpetuity, right? Like it exists for a purpose, and then it's done.
It does, but I'm not sure that there was ever any joint agent in
Hmm.
that case. Whereas, like, if I advise you to kill somebody, and you trust my advice, you're like, well, Eric knows best. Then I am tempted to say that, like, we did, in some sense, we did that together. But like, why those two cases are different, I wish I could tell you.
I guess I'm wondering now whether you think the joint agency aspect, if that's interacting with the normative part of your account, like, do you think that I'm responsible? I'm like morally responsible in all and only those cases in which I form I constitute a joint agent. Is that what explains my responsibility? That would be an interesting way to go, but there might still be like a conditional kind of case, like, well, if you rob a bank, you should definitely use the one that has the weaker security. It seems like I could still be responsible in that case in the same way. I don't know if there's any I mean, it doesn't need to have this, but it would be cool if the joint agency part of your account linked up with the normative upshots part of your account.
Yeah, it would be cool, but I think like the decision about like whether to get married is also really normatively loaded. So I don't really know how to draw a line between those cases based in that way. And this stems from a confusion that I have more generally, which is I don't know how to distinguish between like moral decisions and non-moral decisions, or moral stuff and non-moral stuff. It seems like there's just like important stuff and less important stuff. And so I would it's not in my nature to draw a distinction in those terms if I'm trying to figure out when joint agents are formed and when they're not formed. Because like people dancing the tango, like it doesn't seem like there's anything morally weighty or normatively weighty involved there. But that's a joint agent. It- Like that's a classic example of a joint agent, right? We have to join it. We it takes two. We're tangoing. It's not that like I'm tangoing and then you're tangoing in my vicinity or something like that. It's like
Well,
something we
if it's part of like a team competition and it's down to each team consists of five couples, it's down to us to carry it for the team. Then there's something at stake there. You could be letting your team down if you don't if you don't do a top job of it or something. So you could think of cases where there's a lot more at stake. But yeah, like you, I tend to see morality in moral phenomena as fairly pervasive through human decisions, and I don't. I think that you shouldn't necessarily see that as like a problem. I think that might just reflect the messiness of reality.
I would like to think so. Yeah, but I recognize that other people understand things differently and see some kind of a bright line between like moral stuff and other stuff, other important stuff, but not moral. I'm somewhat blind to that.
All right, Eric, I think this has been a fantastic discussion. Do you have any final thing you want to mention or say?
No, this was great. It was great doing this with you. And I envy the fact that you can be outdoors right
Look
now.
at this. Look at this.
Yeah, look, it looks like paradise. Yeah, this the snow has started to fall now. We've got looks like we have an inch or two already just in the hour that we've been doing this. So it will be shoveling snow for me today.
Well, Eric, thank you so much for joining me here. I'm glad we've finally been able to have this discussion. We talked about it, for a long time, and I look forward to finishing your book. And I've got particular things to think about as I'm reading through it.
Yeah, shoot me more questions if you feel like it. I'd be happy to talk about this more. Love to. All right, thanks, Spencer.